Ooh, interesting. Hi. Um, this is my first live video on YouTube. So I'm using Instagram and YouTube at the same time. Let's see if that works. Lovely to be back. I'm doing this week's session on what to read on hot summer nights. Just noticed some unattractive things behind me. Let me quickly move that. That is a beautiful kimono, but it doesn't look so good on the YouTube camera. So, hi, great to be back this evening to talk about what to read on long summer nights. It's been a while since I've done a bibliotherapy live session due to the fact that my Facebook and Instagram got hacked, and I therefore lost my whole Instagram and Facebook channels, which was an absolute nightmare. So here I am back on Instagram with a new name, and actually look out for what happens next because I am going to start a new channel as well called Infinite Bibliotherapy. So watch out for that. And I'm going to separate my art and my bibliotherapy accounts. But to people who are here for the first time, I do regular weekly sessions talking about bibliotherapy issues live once a week on a Wednesday or Thursday night. So watch my Instagram account to see when I'm doing it. It's always going to be at 9 p.m., probably on a Thursday night, sometimes on a Wednesday night. So this week, I'm going to be talking about my favourite summer reads so far this summer. And I've been very lucky to interview a few authors at the Hay Festival and at the Also Festival. So some of the books I'm going to be talking about will be from there, and others are just books that I have found myself. So I'm going to start with The Hounding by Zenobi Purvis, which is an absolutely fabulous book to be read in a heat wave. And I was really lucky to actually read it first during a heat wave, which was leading up to the Also Festival, which is when I interviewed debut author Zenobi Purvis about this fantastic book, which is all about five sisters who are accused of turning into dogs at night. And it's a very mysterious, magical book set in 1700 during a heatwave when the Thames is slowly drying up. And one of the characters, who's a brilliant character, is called Pete Darling, who is the ferryman who takes people across the river. And he is really disgruntled and upset because the river is slowly falling. His job is to take people across the river, and he is taking fewer and fewer people across as the river sinks down and the river is beginning to turn into mud. So he's having a pretty terrible time, and he takes against the five sisters who go over the river in order to get out of the village. And he thinks that he sees them turning into dogs, and he starts off a rumor that that is what is happening. Hence the brilliant name, The Hounding. And the sisters are called Anne, Elizabeth, Hester, Grace, and Mary. And they are young girls who are just being young girls, or are they in fact transforming at night into dogs? That's what the story unfolds and unveils, but you have to make your own decision about that, really. So this is an absolutely brilliant and bizarre read where you feel that you're reading one of those witchy stories where girls are accused of being witches back in the 1700s, one of those classic stories you might think. But no, it has quite a major twist. Hi, Morgan and Amy. Great to see you here. Um, I'm talking about what to read in the summer. And this is one of my favorite reads, set in a heat wave. And it's all about girls transforming into dogs. I had the joy of meeting Zenobi Purvis at the Also Festival. She's a brilliant writer, and I love the way this book never really tells you quite what's going on, but the girls have a really excellent relationship with each other. Shay, great to see you. And with their grandfather. So their parents have disappeared. They're living with their grandfather, and their grandfather doesn't really know how to deal with them because he just sees them as ordinary girls. He doesn't realize that the rest of the village sees them as potentially evil, dark characters who are transforming into dogs at night and doing strange things. Maybe they're the ones responsible for killing chickens, killing cats and dogs, or are they just being ordinary girls? So that would be one of my top recommendations for a summer read, The Hounding by Zenobi Purvis. It's a witchy tale, but it's got brilliant characters in it. One of the characters also that I love in the book is called Temperance, who's a barmaid who works in the local pub. She's disgusted by everyone that drinks, and her job is to give everyone beers all the time. And she is kind of the voice of reason, but then one day she falls off the wagon and has a sip of beer. And then what happens? Temperance, I love her. She's a great character. But it really captures a particular era, being in the 1700s, and the kind of suspicion of girls, the way that you can't step out of line. And the caption on the back is, "It is safer to be a wild animal than an unconventional young woman." And that is how things work in this society back in the 1700s in England. So that's a brilliant read, highly recommended. Then I'm going to next talk to you about this fabulous book by Kit Duvall, The Best of Everything, which again, I had the joy of interviewing Kit Duvall at the Also Festival. She is famous for having written My Name is Leon, which is an absolutely brilliant novel, which was made into a TV series starring Lenny Henry. And this is her third novel, I think. She has had a 7-year gap between writing her last one, which was called The Trick to Time, which I also loved, and this one. And it's a really lovely, beautiful, warm, and quite sad novel as well. So this tells the story of a lady called Paulette who has high hopes of love. She wants to give her child the best of everything. So she falls in love first with a really terrible guy who, it turns out, is not all that he seems, but she's full of hope and joy at the beginning of the book. Then she ends up with the best friend of the guy that she fell in love with, and she has a child by him. And that child, who's called Bird, she wants to give him the best of everything. But strangely enough, another boy comes into her life who's called Nellie Cornelius. Through long, complicated reasons, he ends up being very much important in her life. He's the son of a man called Shirt and Tie, because he always wears a shirt and tie. And I love the way Kit Duvall describes people in this very human and memorable way. I'm just pouring myself a little summery drink to get into the vibe, having a bit of Aperol, a bit of an Aperol spritz to keep me going on a lovely, long, hot summer night. I wonder if any of you are having a little cheeky cocktail while joining in with these hot summer reads. Cheers to anyone that's joining me this evening or joining me later on. Aperol Spritz, love it. And such great colour. I think it actually needs a bit more of the old Aperol in there. Shay, thinking of you. Orange being a colour that always makes you think of you with your amazing hair. So, where was I? Talking about The Best of Everything by Kit Duvall. So here we are, Kit Duvall, Best of Everything. This is a beautiful, sad, lovely book. Basically, the heroine, Paulette, she comes originally from a place called St. Kitts, and she cooks in the style, in the Caribbean style of St. Kitts, and she teaches everything she knows to Nellie, this boy who becomes important in her life. And the question is she giving the best of everything to Bird, her son, who she has a slightly complicated relationship with, or perhaps is she giving the best of everything to Nellie? It's a really warm, lovely, beautiful, heart-pulling book where you actually fall in love with all of the characters, including Shirt and Tie, even though he's quite a stiff kind of man. So that's the best of everything. Then Call Me Ishmael by Xiaolu Guo, which is a really fantastic read, kind of a response to Moby Dick. Well, very much a response to Moby Dick, in fact. So this is Xiaolu Guo's retelling of the story of Moby Dick, told through the eyes of a girl who is called Ishmael, and she decides to run away to sea and take to the ocean because it's the only thing that she can do. It's the only way that she can find freedom. And she gets involved in the story of Moby Dick. So Xiaolu Guo changes things about the original story by Herman Melville, but she keeps the essence of the story. So there is a kind of mad captain who's obsessed with finding the big whale. The mad captain in this book is a black guy called Seneca, and he is a pretty equally obsessed man. And he thinks that he's got to kill the great whale in the same way that Captain Ahab does in Moby Dick. But what's great about this book is that we have the feminine perspective. So Ishmael is on board the boat, which is destined to try and find the great whale. And she has to pretend to be a man. And if she is caught and discovered to be a girl, then who knows what will happen. But what I love about it is that on board the boat, there's a kind of Chinese fortune teller who uses the I Ching to foretell the fortunes of the sailors on board and to foretell where the whale is going. And that's a really great twist to the whole story of Moby Dick. So it's a kind of radical, brilliant, crazy retelling of Moby Dick. I absolutely loved it. I also had the great fortune to interview Xiaolu Guo at the Hay Festival in May, and she's a really fantastic writer. I love her, and I'm now reading everything that she's written, including Radical, which is her memoir of spending a year in New York, living a kind of radical feminist life, and also My Battle of Hastings, which is describing how she first came to England and lived in Hastings. Xiaolu Guo totally rocks. And it doesn't matter if you haven't read Moby Dick. This is an absolutely brilliant read. And if you do decide to read it and you haven't read Moby Dick, you can just get a summary of Moby Dick itself, and then you'll know kind of how it relates to it. But you can read it, obviously, in its on its own without having to know anything about Moby Dick at all. But it's just interesting to check out Moby Dick as well to see where the two intertwine. And of course, you might want to then go off and read Moby Dick, which is an amazing read in itself. But this is a really brilliant, funny, bizarre, inspiring feminist version of Moby Dick. Great read. And you also get quite a few different perspectives in the book, including a bit of whale speak. And we also have hexagrams, which are scattered throughout the novel, which are relating to the I Ching and explaining the philosophy to some degree of how the I Ching is used and how the fortune teller uses the I Ching in order to predict what's going to happen on board the boat. So it's very, very satisfying. And we have a lot of the same characters, like the harpoonist, who in this book is an absolutely brilliant Maori character covered in tattoos, who has a kind of really important relationship with Ishmael in the book and creates a coffin in the same way that it's created in Moby Dick itself. And the coffin is incredibly important. He creates a coffin for himself because he thinks he's dying. But then the coffin at the end of the book, in the same way that it is in Moby Dick, becomes a life-saving device. So it's just all incredibly, fantastically allegorical. So that's Call Me Ishmael by Zhao Guo. Absolutely brilliant book. Then moving on to another favourite of the summer. This is a really light read, which I found hilarious and absolutely loved. Very good therapy. If you're feeling like you need escapism, perhaps if you're having any kind of relationship issues, and also it is a very heartwarming and ultimately positive book. So this is a book about a girl called Lauren who comes home one day from a party to her flat. She's single, but there's a man in her flat and he is treating her like she's his wife. And she's thinking, what the heck? I'm single. I don't live with anyone. But she realizes that it seems that she's married to him. She looks around the house. There's lots of pictures of their wedding day. She looks on her phone and she sees all these messages to her from this guy who seems to be her husband. So she is completely freaking out, thinking, what's going on? She lives with him for a couple of days and it's apparent that they seem to be married. Then he goes up into the attic to get something, and when he comes down again, he's a different husband. So there's a whole new husband who also believes that he's married to her. And she then has to live with him for a few days and wonder what on earth is going on. Her phone changes, the whole flat changes, the photos change. Then she sends him up into the attic to get something. And the same thing happens. Another man comes down from the attic who's a different husband. And she slowly gets the trick of it that if ever she gets fed up with a man, she can send him up into the attic and a new one will come down. So the story goes through a lot of husbands. Some she falls in love with and they accidentally go up into the attic to get something and then she's brokenhearted. Others she sends right back into the attic without further ado because they're weird or funny or ridiculous. So The Husbands is a really fun and hilarious, ridiculous, great read. There's a bit of a so it's all magical realist because of this idea of man goes into attic, comes down, and he's a new husband, different man. But then there's another aspect of it that she meets at one point another person who comes down from the attic who's going through the same thing. He's called Jorge, and he has had a different story of how he's become a serial husband, which I won't go into. It's quite complicated. But she totally bonds with him because they're in the same boat. He's going through all these different wives or husbands. So he is bisexual. He has husbands and wives. She seems to only have husbands because she's straight. So there's all sorts of complexities going on. But one of the bits I loved about it also is that she ends up with a husband who's fantastically rich, but that really complicates her life because the flat she lives in London is, in this version of reality, an Airbnb. So they go to their fancy house in the country, which means when she realizes that he's quite sinister, Felix, the rich, sinister man, she can't get rid of him because they're not in the place with the attic where she can send him up. They're actually stuck in this big house in the country. What can she do? And that's quite a fun, interesting section of the book. And how it ends is actually very satisfying. I won't tell you what happens, but it kind of makes absolute sense within the context of the book. And it's kind of rather touching and all about love. So kind of sounds like a crazy idea, but it is a book that makes you think about relationships, why people fall in love with each other, what they love love in each other, what they don't love about each other, weird habits that people have, weird things that people say, and a lot of it is absolutely hilarious and crazy, but a lot of it is also very warm, wise, touching, and funny. So that's The Husbands. Then, I wanted to mention Margot's Got Money Troubles, which is by Ruthie Thorpe, and I don't have a physical copy of it because I listened to it on audio, and that is a really good read as well, or a really good listen. Again, a light read, put it in the same sort of bracket as The Husbands, but it's really interesting because it's about a woman, Margot, who she has an affair with her college professor, gets pregnant, decides to keep the baby, kind of slightly out of spite to him, but that's just what she decides to do. And then she obviously has money troubles because she's got to look after the baby without much of an income, and she decides to take nothing from him because she kind of hates him. So she starts an OnlyFans account, and she does all sorts of crazy things on the OnlyFans account that make it go viral and make it more interesting than any other OnlyFans account. So I love the book because it's non-judgmental about what women sometimes have to do in order to make ends meet. It's very much in the modern world, but it's also about the effects of her fame when she does go viral. So when she starts making loads of money, which is what she needs, of course, it becomes more complicated because her family find out and might question what she's doing and why. For people joining now, this is an Aperol Spritz, just getting into the summer evening vibe. Feel free to join me with a cocktail. If you do, let me know what it is. Or a mocktail, even better. So that was the Husbands and Margot's Got Money Troubles. Then I also wanted to mention short stories. So I was at the Also Festival having a fabulous time a couple of weeks ago in the heat wave, which was when I read this absolutely brilliant book, The Hounding, and interviewed Zenobi Purvis. Love this book. For people joining now, this is a really great read, set in 1700 and all about 5 girls who are possibly turning into dogs at night. Love a metamorphosis story. So the theme of the Also Festival, which is a really fabulous festival, by the way, come next year, by an incredible lake where I went paddle boarding every day. Just absolute heaven. So this book, Of the Flesh. Oh yeah, so I was mentioning Also Festival. Its theme was love and horror. So we were looking at lots of books that relate to love and horror. And this, again, was a perfect book for that because it is kind of horror in a way. So this is a collection of short stories, very much relating to horror, but also to some degree love. And it's full of great authors. I really recommend it if you do like a little bit of horror in your fiction. So there's authors such as Michelle Faber, J.K. Chukwu, Susan Barker, Amelia Hart, Ainsley Hogarth, Lionel Shriver, Evie Wilde, Louisa Young, Irenison Okajay, and many more. There's about 20 stories in it, and they're all quite fabulously horrible and weird and great and a little bit sinister, kind of fun to read late at night on a hot summer night. And there's even one which is in graphic form, which I also loved and really enjoyed, both in the story itself and in the illustration style. So this is kind of a really fun summer read. Oh, I've just opened it on one of my favourite ones, which is by Michelle Faber. It's called The Broccoli Eel. And it's about a boy whose mum tells him that there's a broccoli eel living in his stomach, which likes to eat broccoli. And the boy feels the eel writhing inside him a lot of the time. Sinister things ensue. There's one called The Fruiting Body, which again I loved, and it was very sinister and rather great. That's by Bridget Collins, who she wrote, I'm just trying to remember what it was called, a book that I loved, and it's going to come back to me any second now. Bridget Collins, she's a great writer. Suddenly having a blank. The Binding. That was such a good book. Wonder if any of you have read The Binding. So good. That was very magic realist. It's about people who kind of get bound up into books. Their stories get bound into books. So if they have a sinister part of their life that they want to get rid of, they bind it into a book and then they can forget it. That's the basic premise of that book, which is called The Binding. Love that book, so good. Had slightly forgotten about it until this moment. But anyway, Bridget Collins, she wrote a really good short story in here, which is called The Fruiting Body, which is really good. It's about a man and woman that fall in love and they buy a house, which is like a project to do up, but it has a fruiting body in it, which is like such a horrible idea. And it's a kind of moldy, horrible, scary, living creature in the house. And I'm not going to tell you what happens. So these are great short stories for summer nights. Try reading them aloud with a friend or lover. They are really good read alouds, and they're quite short. Mostly, I think most of them would probably take about half an hour to read. They're kind of 15 to 20 pages, so kind of perfect to read on a summer night. Always a lovely thing to do. So, just to round up the books that I've mentioned, short stories of the flesh, 15 stories of modern horror. The Husbands, great fun read, Holly Gramazio, really lovely and heartwarming book, but also fun, very good on audio too. Makes you laugh out loud. Call Me Ishmael by Zhao Lu Guo, which is a modern retelling, in a sense, of Moby Dick with a very big feminist twist. The Best of Everything by Kit Duvall, her fantastic new novel, which I really loved, which really tugs at your heartstrings. Kind of story of an ordinary woman, but who has some very huge feelings which you get deeply involved in. And The Hounding by Zénobie Purvis, which is an amazingly hot heatwave book set in 1700, which I totally recommend to you. Loved it. Debut author. I'm hopefully going to be bringing Zénobie Purvis to a venue in Hurstpierpoint or Brighton in October. So watch this space for that. So thanks so much for joining me this evening. It's been great to be back doing some Bibliotherapy Live. Do leave me comments or messages if you'd like any particular bibliotherapy issues tackled, any questions you've got. I'm going to be trying to do this once a week on a Wednesday night or a Thursday night at 9 p.m. And I'm going to go live on YouTube, I think, as well as doing it on Instagram, because that seems like a good way to go. And also watch my Instagram account, because I'm probably going to start a new account next week, which will be Infinite Bibliotherapy. And I'm going to separate my bibliotherapy and my art account so that it doesn't get too confusing. So check that out. And that's all because I got hacked back in April and lost everything on Instagram and Facebook, which slightly killed me at the time. But here I am, rising from the ashes. Do also let me know what you're reading over the summer. I'd love to know. Send me comments on Instagram, or you can email me, ellabear2@gmail.com. And you can always book a bibliotherapy session direct with me. Go to my website and you'll be able to see how to do that. Thanks so much for coming, and see you next week.